interesting election because all sorts of curveballs are coming towards us. We don't really know in Johannesburg, for example, how well Action SA will eventually perform and what kind of coalition we're likely to see.
The big question in my mind, right, is that everyone is saying, okay, the fact that the ANC is going to drop below 50% for the first time shows that voters are fed up. You could use stronger words, but anyway, let's say fed up, and they don't want one party to dominate any longer. That's why you're seeing DA support also declining somewhat, EFF not really growing. The votes are going the direction of the smaller parties, the newer parties, the independents. But would all of this at the end of the day result in better service delivery? Because if you've got these so many hung councils and more metros now that are going to be ruled by coalition, and coalition politics didn't work very well in the last 5 years. How much is there for us to be optimistic that the politicians have matured and the process has matured and coalition politics will work better, and that this choice of the voters, either by abstaining or by swinging the vote away from the bigger parties, will actually result in better service delivery?
So, to begin with the abstentions, I always advocate that if you think that there's nothing on the ballot, rather go and spoil the ballot, but don't abstain. Because if we count all the spoiled ballots, it gives us a sense of how many people are actually disaffected and can be disaggregated from people who couldn't make it, people who didn't have transport, people who were ill, and so that's a more active way of protesting. In the second instance, I think in the past we've had coalitions of what I call coalitions of spite, where they were basically getting together to keep somebody else out of power. This time round, I'm hoping that the politicians spend much more time negotiating what it is they want with one another before declaring coalitions. And that means figuring out what their core principles are, what they're not willing to compromise on, and what they will have in common by way of governance priorities for the municipality. And this, I think, is a big ask from politicians in South Africa, who, because of the nature of politics, tend to have party interest at heart. So we've heard individual councillors, individual officials in a smaller party saying, we will never go into coalition with such and such. And you just think that's a very ridiculous thing to do. What you need to do is work with those people in municipalities to get ward services run, to make sure that the infrastructure is maintained. And you cannot simply oppose people based on one ideological principle, if that principle isn't your extermination. And that, I think, is crucial. As for maturity, I think that's again a third big ask. My sense is that the rhetoric in the lead up to these elections worried me, that people tended to want to say anything that is possible to get themselves elected, but didn't have the real politic approach of knowing that they're going to be coalitions, and therefore beginning to work at what it is you have in common with the potential political opponents that you can begin to work on to the benefit of citizens and residents.
The DA's position, and let's assume that they don't change from this position, that they under no circumstances going to go into a coalition with the EFF, and one can understand that, looking at what happened in the last 5 years. Can that come back to bite them? If you look at the projected numbers now, if the EFF were to throw in their lot with the ANC?
It could, and that might not be something that the DA regrets. Let's not forget the report on the DA's performance in the national elections, which led to Musi Maimani's exit from the party, in which the Leon Kutsia report, in which it was indicated that the party needs to go back to its core principles. And so, you know, in 2016 I called them coalitions or agreements of convenience, and it turned out to be very inconvenient, and not necessarily for the parties, but for the people who lived in these spaces that were so misgoverned. So that might not be something that the DA would regret in the longer term. In the shorter term, it does keep them out of power if they have this as a non-negotiable. And this may then result, given the implication in other forms of maladministration, funds gone missing, this may expose citizens and residents to the troubles inside both the EFF and ANC when it comes to governance and or management of municipal finances.
Finally, then, an assessment of the big parties, right? So there's a lot of focus on Action SA, primarily in Johannesburg. That's where they're getting their votes to a large extent. Gauteng, rest of the country, very minimal. Freedom Front Plus eating away some of the Afrikaner vote from the DA. IFP eating away some of the votes from the ANC and KZN. The ANC Some are saying that had it not been for Ramaphosa, it would have been worse. Others are saying Ramaphosa should take responsibility. There are those who say that, well, look at the gap between the DA and the ANC as things stand. The ANC still almost has more than double the support that the next party has, which is the DA. And then where do you put the EFF in all of this? Because big talk, a lot of coverage, mega controversies, they don't seem to be growing by a significant rate.
So this, I think, is part of the problem for all parties, and the EFF is, sort of demonstrating that the EFF seems to talk to young people, and it seems to address itself at young people. And this is a majority young country. Most of the population is under 35. But the problem is that these people may come out to support you at rallies, they may come out in numbers that are significant visually when you have the sea of red, so to speak. But whether they are registered is the second problem. We know that youth registration is below that for other age groups. And then secondly, even if they're registered, do they turn out on the day to vote for you? We know that the polling in universities and other tertiary campuses is traditionally horrifically low. They're sometimes in the single digits at the numbers of people who are eligible to vote. And that disaffection, that alienation of the youth from the political space is something that all political parties, in fact the society, needs to work on. Because young people, one doesn't want to quote Whitney Houston, but young people are the future. They are going to be the ones who live into the second half of the century, and therefore, in a sense, the politics has to serve them. And people my age and older really aren't going to be allowed in the second half of the century. We won't be alive. And so we're not governing in their interest, we're governing in our own, which is what we're seeing with the looting and the maladministration. And this, I think, is something that young people need to be woken up to, and they need to be agitated to participate. The EFF itself, I think, needs to think about its campaigning processes and how it operates, because one would have assumed that 7 years on, 3 elections in, this is their 4th attempt, 2 national elections, this is their 2nd local government election, I would have thought their numbers would grow more significantly. That they've not done so is, I think, something they need to reflect on, because they are saying the kinds of things that young people say they want to hear, but the fact that those numbers are not translating into significant votes in specific areas, particularly in the large urban centres, that needs to be dealt with. They've gone into official opposition in some places in the northwest. That's interesting as a shift, but it's in Johannesburg, Tshwane, Nelson Mandela Bay, eThekwini where you will make the difference, because we're a fast urbanizing country. The majority of people already live in cities and towns, and by the end of this decade, a significant majority of them will live there, and parties need to speak to those people, younger people under 35, who are urban dwellers, who are facing unemployment, no economic opportunities, poor service delivery, no housing, and really badly managed spaces. And that, I think, is a failure of the EFF that they need to put to something.
Angelo Fick, always a pleasure listening to your insightful perspective. Thank you so much.
Shukran, thank you.